Hey, welcome back. I have another video for you, and this time I'm going to be talking about Warhammer, the Old World, because we now have confirmation on the core factions that are going to be available to us at launch. Now, for the last few years, GW has been slowly teasing us with information after the announcement, but it's been ramping up. I've said this before, many other people have been saying it. It's going to come out this year. It'll be very strange if it doesn't, based on how much this has ramped up. Games Workshop has a pattern. They tell us about stuff anywhere from 2 to 6 months before it's coming out, seems to be their thing, just to get us hyped, but not to get us too focused on this new shiny thing. They want us to still buy what's out or what's coming, closer to the current moment. They just want to tell us, hey, just for your information, this will be coming if you're interested, and I think that just is what's happening now. We'll get an official announcement sometime, probably in the summer, I'm guessing. Probably about 3 months before launch, so it could be any time in the next 6 to 8 weeks that we might officially hear about this. So what they did start off by telling us, or sorry, I guess they didn't start off, they ended their article by telling us that certain factions are going to be not core, meaning they're not key players in the lore at the point for various reasons. They still exist in the world. The demons, the ogres, the Skaven, the dark elves, lizardmen, they're just busy doing their own thing. Skaven have a civil war. Dark elves are, I think at this point, sort of licking their wounds from a loss against Ulthuan. I forget exactly what they're doing in the lore. Ogres are just off doing ogre stuff. To be fair, they're one of the ones that are easier to fit in just because they could wander in as mercenaries or just a wandering band of monster men coming to eat whoever. But they will not be playing a prominent role in the lore, although that's not surprising either, just because ogres don't play a prominent role in any lore of Warhammer Fantasy that I can think of. They have their own periods that are important, but it very seldom is a big deal unless there's a massive ogre migration that is threatening different factions. And there's just different groups that are not going to be getting initial highlighted releases. They're just going to get some PDFs. It doesn't even sound like they're going to be getting their boxes back if they're missing any, although they do tend, from what I can see, to be the armies that have the least amount of missing stuff. There's very little, if anything, missing of the Dark Elves. There's very little, if anything, missing of Ogres, of Skaven, and so on. Lizardmen just got a big reboot, and it's all stuff that looks pretty snazzy. I feel like it's probably just going to fit fine. The core factions are the ones that, historically speaking, quote unquote historically, are important during this period of the Warhammer world, 200 years before the end times, 175 years or more before Karl Franz takes over, before Archaon is really somebody in the lore to notice. And this is even before the colleges of magic. That's actually going to be one of the bigger differences, is what's actually happening in the world and what's available. We're going to talk about that specifically as I go through these books, but I don't want to get this video dragging out. I tried filming this already. It was like 40 plus minutes, and it was just still not going to end for a while. I didn't want this to be that long. So I'm going to try to go through this quickly and just talk about these core factions now that I've gotten the preamble out of the way. So the game is based around the Empire. Now, these guys here, they are your bog standard humans. They don't have anything that stands out other than firearms. The other humans, which you'll see down here, they don't have firearms. Sorry, the other good humans. There are more humans over here, but they are different. So the Empire, it's very much a real-world military force. It's kind of like the Imperial Guard in 40k. You have ranks of infantry, they have supporting units, they have artillery, they have knights. It's a combined armed force. You just happen to have magic. There's really nothing that stands out for them in terms of what makes them fantasy, other than the magic, other than some of the more fantastical beasts like griffins. So when you pick these guys, if you pick these guys, you're picking them for an aesthetic and maybe for certain play styles. And if you really aren't sure if you're into fantasy, these might be the guys for you, just because you really don't have to worry about magic so much, especially, again, at this period. There is no colleges of magic. The Empire doesn't get colleges of magic to officially train wizards until about 100 years after the setting begins, which is probably going to be a campaign booklet because it involves a big chaos invasion. That's a further down the line thing, but they'll just have basic little, like, they're called hedge wizards. They might be court magicians. They'll exist to some extent. They just will not be prominent like we see them now. There's not going to be a Balthazar Gelt type character, is what I'm saying. Our magic is probably going to be based around the warrior priests. It's going to be prayers and some light magic through wizards. Otherwise, what you're going to get with these guys is, again, very ranked up. I'm trying to find some pictures. Ranked up units, knights, and they are just very colorful. They're broken into provinces. Right now, the Empire will be in a civil war because this is a long 1,000+ year period called the Era of the Three Emperors. Essentially, it's what happened with the three popes in the Middle Ages, where just three different factions can't agree on who's going to be the next emperor, so they kind of duke it out and they all instate their own emperor or empress. And yeah, for like 1,000+ years, they sort of duke it out until a future lore event will unite the Empire. So that's one. That's the first so-called good guys. They did change that. Initially, they had good guys and bad guys, but that didn't last. It was pointed out to them, rightfully so, that some of these guys are not bad guys or good guys. So it doesn't really make sense. Just calling them core factions is the best. I'm going to go with Bretonnians next. Now, these guys didn't get a fancy hardcover book in 8th edition. Neither did Skaven or Beastmen. So they're a little bit of an oddball when it comes to my collection, but this picture here that I opened to miraculously sort of sums up who they are. These are very much Arthurian legend knights, and they are brightly colored. They go in these big ranked called lance formations. They're narrow and deep, and they slam in with lots of knights. There's multiple types of knights, I think like 5 different kinds, plus your characters, and they're supported by peasants who are the only option for maybe ranged attacks or blocks of infantry. We might get some sort of foot knight in this edition. We'll see like units of them, but as of the end of 8th edition, we did not have foot knights. Our only infantry were peasants. So with these guys, basically, you are going to be playing, again, the Arthurian legend knights, and it's going to be all about getting really good charges. I can't see there being a big change up to how they play. It's possible that they may have some gunpowder. In older editions of Fantasy, they did. But this edition, 6th edition, basically said that they don't use gunpowder because it's cowardly. Even their peasants aren't allowed it. So they just have bows and trebuchets. But they said they're going to look at different editions for inspiration. So maybe they'll say that, 200 years prior was sort of the last time that the Bretonnians had cannons. I do believe that their warships use cannons sort of as a, we don't have much of a choice. It's just how it works on the sea. We can't just be hurling rocks and arrows. We needed something more powerful, so we let it go at sea. So we'll see if maybe on land they get cannons, but I doubt it. They'll also have flying units, flying knights. That's one of the types. And the big thing about the Bretonnians is these are one of the rare armies that have a full-on ward save on every unit of knights, at least. And this is because they all pray to the lady. So that's most likely going to be one of their big things, is that you're going to have very tough units in that they have a good armor save of around 2+, or however the system works. It'll be a good save. They'll be quick and they'll be hard hitting, although you don't want to get stuck in combat too long because you can get bogged down and slowly whittled back. But you will also, again, have a ward save. So you'll have an armor save and then a ward save most likely. And it makes them very tough and resilient, and it means that you can take a bad charge and last a turn while you figure out how to get reinforcements in there to break that stalemate. Moving over to the bad guys. These guys are bad guys, so that's what I'm going to call them. These are the Northern Barbarians. They are humans. They also have monsters and such in their list, but they are basically humans. They worship the dark gods of chaos, and they constantly come and attack the non-chaos lands when they're not fighting each other. And they're always trying to like take over the world. Like I said, it's a future lore point. Asuvar Kul is going to bring a big horde down. The great war against chaos is going to happen. This is when Kislev will be released, guaranteed, because that's where it gets stopped. Even though the Empire is there, the main focus is Kislev, and then the Empire, dwarves, elves, they all show up to help because they all see this is a major threat, that stopping it in Kislev is the best way to do this. So with these guys here, you are talking about probably the toughest troops in the game. They have decent medium troops with the Marauders, and they could be even light troops, but they're still very strong. They have a good glass cannon potential. But then you've got these guys. These are Warriors of Chaos. They are encased in the best armor in the game as far as foot troops go. It's up there with Imperial Plate Mail and Dwarven Gromroll, which are all 4+ armors just on their own. The way fantasy armor saves work, unlike 40k, you don't just get this is your save of 5+ or 3+ or whatever. You stack armors. Do they have light armor 6+? Do they have medium armor, or sorry, heavy armor? That'd be 5+ instead. Do they have this better armor of 4+? Okay, now do they have a shield? That makes it +1, so it's a 3+ now on these guys if you have a shield. And then you can mount them for +1. Bard, basically put armor on the horse for another +1. You can really get Chaos Warriors to be almost unkillable. They also tend to have very good weapon skill, strength, and toughness to go with that, meaning these are some of the most elite troops in the game, but they are very expensive. These armies tend to be very small. If you go for the warriors, you can make them bigger and go with Marauders and use a lot of Marauder stuff and just have one warrior unit maybe as your core, and then focus everybody else as your the bulk of your troops, which is also very lore friendly. Now, obviously, everything I'm saying today about these armies is really dependent on what they do to change the game, but this is an army that I think most people will recognize as your sort of stereotypical bad guys, especially in Warhammer. These are your chaos bad guys. Again, monsters, they're all mutated, and very heavy troops. These are Chaos Space Marines in fantasy. So, if you're interested in chaos and you like to have, like, you know, big monsters, big tough dudes, these might be the guys for you. They also have some of the most expensive characters. This also actually goes along with them being one of the cheaper armies to collect. Right now, I think I have like 60 models, and those 60 models are like 700-800 points, which doesn't sound like a lot if you're thinking like 40k the way things are done, but in fantasy, it's, you know, it's very easy to have a lot of troops. These guys here, you tend to have fewer. So if you're looking for a cheaper army, and it's going to be a core army, you could go with ogres or even cheaper. But these guys here, these might be your best bet. Okay, another army that's elite. So actually, you know what? A lot of these armies are quite elite so far, which I've noticed. Dwarves, also a prominent race. These guys are your fantasy dwarves. They live in the mountains, they mine, they have good armor, they, you know, worship ancestors. They have, instead of magic, they have runes. They themselves can't cast any magic, but they have a natural resistance to it. But then they can also just basically put a bunch of runes on their weapons and armor and make them magical. It's the same thing. It's just a fancy way to get magic. These guys here, again, they're very similar to Chaos in that they have lots of very tough troops. Even their basic guys are pretty tough. They just happen to be slow because they're short. And they, instead of monsters, these guys, like the Empire, have a lot of war machines. Now, as I said with the Empire, you have a lot of war machines, some of which I don't think are going to exist. I don't think the steam tank was a thing back then, but I'd have to look into the lore. But with these guys here, most of this stuff did exist, I believe. They tend to take centuries to accept new technology, meaning if there were cannons and organ guns and helicopters and stuff, because they have all those in 8th edition. They could still be available in this. I don't know the lore, but in theory, it could just be, in the lore, they just now write that, no, the helicopters and the gyro bombers and all that, they were invented. It's just that, it took about 300 years before everybody fully accepted them, because that's how they go. They don't like new stuff. When the engineers design something new, even the older engineers will look at them and say, these young guys, they don't respect tradition. They make something new. What's wrong with the stuff I made? What's wrong with the stuff my father made? It served us well. We don't need this newfangled technology. It's very like boomer mentality, and it's just funny to listen to, because they'll be tinkering away with something and complaining about somebody else's tinkering. So it almost feels like you're in some sort of maker's corner, and they just think their stuff is better than that other guy's, and he's like, thinking outside the box in the wrong way. They're a very fun army to play. And again, they're going to have a fairly low model count compared to, say, Empire or Skaven, Beastmen, things like that. But they still can have a lot of troops, because even their basic troops aren't that expensive. And they're not as good as, say, the Chaos Warriors. But then they have stuff like, going back a page, these here, Iron Breakers. They are, I think, the most durable infantry in the game, just because of their setup. They are quite good. And they're fun. They also have these guys, the Slayers. They're probably the most interesting unit in fantasy, I think, because they're one of those rare cases where a unit in a faction just doesn't look like it belongs. They don't wear armor. They have all their hair dyed orange, and they just run forward looking to get into a big fight. They're your unit that's most likely to want to move. Dwarves tend to sit still and use handguns, crossbows, cannons, and whatnot to beat up the enemy before they hit their ranks. And then they just take a charge and they survive it and then whittle them down just through attrition. It's how dwarves have always sort of worked. You can play them different ways, but that's the most common. Slayers are your like run forward kind of guys, and it's rare in an army to have something that's so drastically different, I think. It's not like having cavalry with Empire. Obviously cavalry are going to charge forward. They're going to be the ones making the big moves, the big charges. These guys here are just still dwarven infantry. They just decide that they want to die a glorious death, and they run forward looking for it. Moving on, we now have Tomb Kings. I'm going to move on to these guys first, because Tomb Kings are another army that's very special to Warhammer fans. I think because, like Bretonnians, I didn't mention this, Bretonnians did not get moved over to Age of Sigmar. They got removed completely. All their models were put out of production. And in the lore, really, it's sort of a joke, but it's not. It seems like the Flesh Eater Court, which are basically like ghouls, they're a bunch of cannibals. They are the leftover Bretonnians or something like them. They're like nobles who are, devolved into these undead zombie people, but they picture themselves as noble lords at great banquets, when really they are just slavering monsters, gnawing on bones. And they'll have people over, like, there's a story where they invite some guy, and they invite him to their feast, and they're basically it's the drunk telling you how, the night went and how classy he was, when everybody knows he was just like falling down, slurring, spilling things. It's very much like that. Tomb Kings also got deleted. Back on track here. They just disappeared. The range wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It wasn't amazing. It just wasn't great. They also were very terrible on the tabletop, because this book apparently just isn't amazing. I've never seen them played in 8th edition in person, so I can't really attest to how bad they are. I've only read through the book, and I can see things you can do that are fun. I can see things you could do that would not be fun. So I sort of get it. They also, again, I think they didn't fit the idea of Age of Sigmar, of what they wanted to do, and they were also trying to limit ranges. And these two, it was like, well, we already have undead. We don't need zombies and mummies, so we're gonna go with zombies. And we didn't need humans with guns and all this other varied stuff, or humans that are on horses. And it felt like, I think they just wanted to get rid of stuff that seemed unnecessary, superfluous. They just kind of culled, and unfortunately these two armies disappeared. It does seem like they're going to be the starter sets, though. So, Tomb Kings, you are talking about basically ancient Egypt, except they're skeletons. They have magic powers that are around raising the dead, just like vampires, and they have everything is a skull and bone motif. They're quite fun, as far as I'm concerned. I think they're fun. Maybe not to play, but to look at. Not to build either. I do not like building these guys. I tried building an army of them once, and I got really frustrated with building the skeletons. I did not like them, and I sold them just to get rid of the skeletons. Because even though I think they look cool, they're just skeletons with Egyptian shields. There's nothing really special about them, and I don't like building skeletons. So that was the end of that army. That was many years ago. I probably could do better now. I'm older and less easily frustrated, but yeah. Then they have this stuff here. This is why I was sad about losing them after 8th edition and going into Age of Sigmar. They had cool stuff like dudes riding snakes, like big snake statues. They had other big statue monsters. These are all like part of the lore. Basically, the undead pharaohs found a way to live forever, but they just kind of lived forever as mummies. And then they used magic to keep all their loyal soldiers alive and their servants. And they can use magic to bring these magic statues to life to help them fight. It's a very cool concept for an army. I'm glad to see them coming back. I think a lot of people will enjoy them, just if only for the nostalgia of seeing Tomb Kings. And I think that there's going to be a lot of sales of this starter box just because it's Bretonia and Tomb Kings. I joked about this years ago. That was how it was going to go. If they put out a Bretonia Tomb King box and said, you know, mumble, 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 that's why the lore works. You know, it didn't even matter what the lore was. It didn't matter that they were separated by thousands of kilometers. Nobody was going to care. People were just going to go, oh, I want like 3 of those because I'm going to get a huge army of each of these guys. And GW is just going to rake in the cash as long as they can produce enough boxes of that thing. It's going to be a lot like the Horus Heresy box set, I think, where it's such a good value of stuff people want that you're going to see a lot of people buying 2 or 3. And again, just the nostalgia. Plus, this is 2 armies versus just, you know, 1 Space Marine army split in 2. This is going to be 2 unique armies. And I think it's going to be a fun one to see. Lore-wise, they just basically show up and attack people who have come down and attack them. Specifically, usually to get back treasure. Their land is just a bunch of dead cities, and everyone just thinks it's dead cities, so they go down every once in a while to steal gold and whatnot. And then the Tomb Kings basically either catch you and kill you to stop you from stealing their gold, or they find out you stole their stuff, and then they spend years, decades, centuries getting it back, going as far as places like the Northern Chaos Wastes to find the marauders who came down and stole some gold. Like, you know, my God, they made it out with a pile of treasure. We will spend 100 years attacking you until we get every last gold coin back. They're very, like, hoardy like that. Then we've got High Elves. High Elves are just, you know, Lord of the Rings elves, kind of, in many ways. They're your very shiny, clean elves. They are long-lived. They are good fighters. They're not very tough, but they make up for that with the ability to hit first, at least in this edition, and effectively wipe out a lot of enemies before they have a chance to fight back. They also have a lot of elite units, and they have some cool stuff like they have the most access to dragons. That's an elf thing in general in this game. And things like griffins. Like, it's a lot easier for them to get these types of big flying monsters than most armies, at least on the good side. And they also have very potent magic. Magic is their big thing. These are the guys that taught the humans how to use magic. These are the guys that, like, Teclis came over and said, wow, that war against Chaos went really poorly, and we barely stopped them. You know what? It would have been a lot handier for everybody if you guys knew how to use magic instead of like proper magic, not this like little, you know, I picked up a few tricks here and there magic. We want you to learn proper lores of magic, harness the winds of magic. And he helped them open those colleges. So these are your, you know, humans and elves have an ancient pact army, and they look really, really cool. These guys here, try to get to the pictures. Lots of nice, clean whites. bright metals, and other fun colors. They're quite cool. These are the Dark Elves. They are unfortunately not getting a core release yet, but they are essentially elves that broke off from these guys after a disagreement of who should be king. And they are the evil version of them. It's very, good and evil. Two sides of a coin thing. They are literally the same people. These guys left and went somewhere else because they just did not like the direction things were going. And it's cool to see High Elves be a core faction, because these guys here, while they weren't completely removed from the game, they were gutted. There is not much of their stuff left. That's actually another thing about Dwarves I didn't mention. Dwarves got gutted. Their newest stuff is available, but a lot of Dwarven stuff disappeared. Empire still has most of their stuff. Warriors of Chaos are all pretty much all still there. Some of the non-core factions, same thing. They're all pretty much there. But the High Elves, they, for all intents and purposes, they got removed from the game, very much like the Tomb Kings and Bretonnians. Some of their kits survived, but it wasn't very many. Even the dragons disappeared. Anyways, yeah, these are another one that are interesting. They have a very, to me, unique look. That they're very bright and clean, and I think they look really nice ranked up. A lot of times, armies in fantasy, when they're all ranked up, they don't stand out as much. I feel like with my Empire, they sort of all just blend together, because you tend to paint them as one province. Warriors of Chaos, they tend to blend together, in my opinion. A lot of armies do that. These guys here, their units all tend to have very separate designs. You have your basic Spear Elves, which look nothing like the Phoenix Guard, which look nothing like the White Lions, which look nothing like the Sword Masters. I feel like these guys have very unique sculpts, and it's really nice to see that they're all coming back. It's going to be really fun to see High Elves on the boards again. And then we got two left. I'll do the Wood Elves, just because we just did High Elves. They are just like High Elves and Dark Elves, except when all the elves sort of went after each other, these guys went and lived in the woods, and they're cool because they have tree dudes and, forest spirits. They're a really fun-looking army. When I first started playing the game, they were basically just archers and spearmen and riders and a few tree dudes. But they've really expanded the range by the end of 8th edition. Unfortunately, this is another one that just got gutted. And it's going to be good to have these models back. It seems like most everything is coming back, so that's really nice. To have those three armies, the High Elves, the Wood Elves, and the Dwarves in the initial release is good, I think, just because there's so much we need to see back, and they were three of the armies hardest hit. In fact, I feel like the most hardest hit armies all seem to be core. I think I've already said that, but I'm going to say it again just in case I didn't. Because like I said, Skaven, Ogres, Dark Elves, most of their stuff seems to be intact. The only one that pops to mind that really got hurt bad by the move to Age of Sigmar was Chaos Dwarves, but they are already such a minuscule part of the game that it's not shocking that they're not a core part, and it's not shocking they lost so much, because they were really just an extra thing from Forge World at the end. Yeah, these guys are fun too. They look really neat. Lots of these forest ranger looking dudes, lots of archers. It's a good mix of sort of the I feel like they kind of look like what the Hobbit cartoon from the 70s, what the Wood Elves were trying to look like. And I feel like they're really built on that. I don't know, that's how it feels to me. Very cool. Very bright models, but also a lot of earthy tones too when you see. It's lots of greens and browns, because they're meant to be also very stealthy and hiding in the woods. Their land is basically a big forest. They have multiple places they live, but their core one is a big forest in the center of Bretonia, and essentially they just want to be left alone. They don't want to be bothered by the Bretonians. They just want the Bretonians to stay out of their way, and they want everybody else to stay out of their way. They are... Nope. Sorry, I had an intercom message from my wife. Yeah, so In the lore, basically, they very seldom come out of the woods, and if they do, it's only because making an attack somewhere else is in the best interest of protecting themselves. They do not want to be involved in anything. It's basically, they're the hermit race. They just want to be left alone. They don't want beastmen or orcs in their woods, and they don't want humans in their woods. It doesn't matter whether you're good or evil, whether you go there for a picnic or you go there to chop down a tree. They don't want you there. Stay out of their woods. They're an interesting looking race too. It's weird that they're going to be a core one, I do admit, because again, they're super introverted and they don't really play any big part in the world. In fact, the only thing that they play a big part in the world for is in Bretonia, and this is just a spoiler through the end times. It just turns out they have a big part to play in Bretonia's religion, which is following the Lady of the Lake. It's, again, very Arthurian. I forgot to mention that during the Bretonian segment. But basically, the Bretonians worship a figure called the Lady in the Lake, Lady of the Lake, like King Arthur. And all of their mages are women that are selected essentially by the Lady of the Lake and her representatives, like the Fae Enchantress. And their job is to basically provide magical support. They also take boys, but the boys never come back. I can't remember what happens to them in the lore. I think it's actually explained in the end times, but yeah, they have like literally that one sort of thing that was tossed in at the end of the fantasy life cycle. Otherwise, I don't really get them being a core faction, other than I really think it's just GW put them in here because they need so much stuff. I think they were like, well, we're only releasing stuff for the core factions, which is, again, maybe I'm not sure about that being 100% true, but it really came across in the last article that the core armies will get stuff first. And these guys need it. So I think that might be why they're there. We have 2 left. I only have 1 of the books, though. Orcs and Goblins, yeah. If you like big, violent green dudes running around with the sole intention of picking fights because it's fun, that's Orcs. They have a lot of troops. They tend not to be the best troops, but they're very good in combat. They just aren't very good at following instructions, but they're neat looking. They also have Goblins, which are their cheaper version. So Orcs are the big green guys, and they're very muscular, and they're like, you know, the highest ranking members of the Greenskin Society, Orcs and Goblin tribes. And they have various tiers in their own hierarchy with the, you know, like the biggest orcs are the toughest, basically. They're the bosses. The bigger you are, the more powerful you are, the more respect you get, and the higher your station. But even the smallest orc is going to be bigger than a goblin, thus he's in charge of them, or at least above them. Goblins come in different varieties, but essentially they're all the same thing. They're just the smaller green dudes. They might live in the forest and hang out with spiders. They might live in a cave and hang out with things called squigs, or they might just be standard goblins and have nothing super unique about them other than they're just smaller orcs. They also have lots of cool monsters like trolls, giants, big spiders, smaller spiders. Again, these are squigs. They are just basically giant mouths and teeth on legs. And the style of play for them, it's kind of interesting. They're one of the stranger and funner armies to look at on a board because they're very bright and dark at the same time, very dirty. But they play a mix of horde and that just runs forward, but there's a lot of tactics to how you play. It might be these guys throwing out dudes like this, fanatics, which will then just randomly spin around the board and hit people and cause damage. It might be using spells that can really drastically change the outcome of a combat, like, you know, swapping dice rolls for 6s become 1s, 1s become 6s, stuff like that. And they also have lots and lots of mobility. They might have the most unit options in the game because of the mix. They have several pages of characters because you have all the different types of characters for orcs, whether they're lords or heroes. But then you have the exact same things, but for goblins. And then you also have them broken down into, are they the Regular orcs, black orcs, savage orcs? Are they goblins, night goblins? It just goes on and on. Um, and it's the same with their troops. They have different types of troops: orcs and savage orcs and black orcs. Orcs with arrows, which they're not very good with. They have goblins, goblins on wolves, orcs on boars, chariots that are goblin chariots. I think there's goblin wolf rider chariots and orc boar chariots. Um, if you want an army that gives you tons of variety while still feeling like an army, these might be the guys for you. Um, and again, you can have a lot of guys. They're just really numerous, and you can bulk out these armies really easily with a variety of different options. And it's always going to feel like your army if you wanted to. You do not have to say to yourself, okay, well, there's only like X many options, and these are the best ones, so I need to sort of include them. There's always going to be best options, but with the goblins and the orcs mixed together and the different varieties, sub-factions of each, you really can make the army you want, whether it's pure savage orcs, whether it's pure forest goblins, night goblins, if you want to just focus on regular orc boys, and it goes on and on and on. It's a really fun list to look at and to build with, so I think this one here might be fun. These guys are also missing some stuff, so again, it'll be nice to see that back. The last one I don't have, it's Beastmen. They are sort of the unloved child of Chaos. They used to be part of the Warriors of Chaos, but then they got removed from that and given their own book. I think that was a mistake because they just were not well supported ever. Their rules were either not good or their miniature range was poor. They've never been that popular. It's why they were one of the armies that didn't really get released for 8th edition. Unlike Skaven, I think who just had bad luck to not get released. I think Bretonia was a mix of bad luck, but also, they weren't as popular as others. A lot of people had Bretonians, but it was more just because they had once been in a starter box. But the Beastmen, I don't know. I saw people try to play Beastmen, and most of them gave up because it just wasn't... It didn't feel good, usually, to play Beastmen. You either had to play a very specific way, or you just weren't going to be able to compete often just because of how poorly it was written. It's very much like the Tomb Kings. If you were going to pick undead, vampires were the better choice. If you're going to pick chaos, Warriors of Chaos are better. Demons were better when they finally got their own book in like 7th and 8th. And Skaven, even though they weren't technically chaos and they only sort of later got shoehorned into chaos, they, again, they felt better to play. So Beastmen were a little bit of an oddball unit. Our army option then, and I feel like, again, it's just a case of they're in there because they're an easy one to toss in, even though they weren't, they're just a single facet of chaos. They weren't like a big power. They pop up everywhere. There's what's called Bray herds or herds of Beastmen. They're all over the place. And they just cause problems for everybody. So they're a really good, like, generic bad guy, like the Orcs and Goblins. I think that's why they're in there. I think the Orcs and Goblins and the Beastmen are going to be our two, like, generic bad guy races. They're just they're the barbarians at the gate that are actually a threat at the moment, versus the Warriors of Chaos, who are a huge threat, but most people don't really pay attention to them or even know about them. They just know that there's wild men up in the north, and that's more Kislev's problem. I don't have the book. It's the one book I don't own, apparently. I've realized that after. I'm going to have to rectify that at some point. Just because I do have all the 8th edition books, and I would like to have that one, even though it's a 7th edition book, just for the completeness of it. Anyways, those are the core factions and sort of my takes on them. I can definitely go way more in-depth on each one. I just wanted to try to keep this short, and, with... whatever it was, like 9 factions, I really couldn't give too much time each and keep this short. And this is already 40 minutes. I can see this is a long video, so I really had no way to... Basically, I had to choose between giving some information or just basically going, these are them, neat. So I wanted to find a middle ground, and I think this is where I'm going to stop it. So hopefully this was helpful to people who are interested, I will probably actually just do a army by army video for the next little bit, just because now that we know who they are, that's going to be the core factions. I can talk about more about how they play and what they look like. For some of them, like, I do have some high elves, I have some dwarves, I have some warriors, I have some Bretonnians, I have some empire. I can take all those out and actually show off models. I can do, you know, maybe some painting with them. And basically I can do stuff with each army and give them more focus, talk about who they are in the lore, what we might see of them in the lore that's going to be old world, and what might happen with them as the lore is expanded through campaign books and whatnot. That seems to be the direction they're hinting at. And yeah, that's what I'll do. If that's interests people, try to, you know, you can keep track of the channel by subscribing. I'll try to remember to put my Discord link in the information below. And yeah, if you have any thoughts or comments, just leave them here. Let me know what you thought of the video. And as always, have a great day.